Well, good evening and welcome everyone. I now call to order this meeting, this special meeting for September 14th, 2020 of the York County School Board. It's our work session for the month. We're going to see if we can make sure we get Mr. Myatt on. He was having some technical difficulties and let's see, I don't see him at the meeting. Is our IT there? Can they make sure that Mr. Myatt's on?
He actually sent a note to us that he is trying to access via his desktop. So he said that he should come back on in a second.
Okay. I don't want to start the meeting until he's actually on. I did see that chat. I'll see if he's still there. Ms. Berry, what would be the proper procedure for us in this type of situation with a remote virtual meeting and waiting on a board member?
Well, we do have a quorum, so we can proceed.
Okay, so we'll proceed and he can jump in when he gets it worked out. Okay. All right, well, our first week of school went very well considering some minor hiccups we had, like everybody's going to have on the first day of school. Instead of having transportation issues, we had a few IT issues here and there. I was able to go around with the superintendent on the first day of school, and everybody was upbeat. They were happy. Teachers are doing a phenomenal job. So I appreciate everyone working together and having patience as we navigate through this new process that we're learning. And now we'll get our virtual meeting started, and we'll begin with our roll call of our board members. And I see Mr. Byatt is here. There he is. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. All right, we're going to start a roll call for each member to now state their remote location. So we'll start with Mr. Higginbotham.
Yes. Participating at 111 Ivy Arch, Yorktown, Virginia, 2693.
All right, Ms. Geralds.
100 Leanne Court, Yorktown, Virginia, 23692.
Mr. Schaefer. Mr. Schaefer, you're muted. If you could do it one more time, unmuted.
There we go. 115 Catawba Court, Williamsburg, Virginia, 23185.
Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Myatt.
Sure. 105 Kiskiak Turn, 23693.
Thank you. And I'm James Richardson from 710 Ship Point Road, Yorktown, Virginia, 23692. So on June the 16th of 2020, the York County Board of Supervisors adopted Ordinance 20-11R addressing the continuity of operations during the COVID-19 pandemic and allowing for continuation of remote real-time electronic meetings of this board. Therefore, all board members are participating in this special meeting remotely through electronic communications pursuant to School Board Resolution 20-19, authorizing board meetings through electronic communication without a physically assembled quorum and in compliance with York County Ordinance 20-11R during the pendency of Ordinance 20-11R, the COVID-19 pandemic emergency. We're streaming the live video of our special meeting through the Division YouTube channel and through YCSD TV. And I'd also like to mention that our meeting agenda and documents are available by logging on to Board Docs through our YCSD website at yorkcountyschools.org. So we're going to start with the opening school report, and we have several presentations lined up this evening. And the first one is our opening school report. And I'll ask Dr. Shandor to share information about this topic. Dr. Shandor.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Good evening, school board members. We have a number of items on the agenda for presentations this evening from our chief officers. So just a brief opening report, just some comments. As of today, so we have 5 days under our belt. We certainly had some glitches and hiccups in the beginning of the school year last week. But I will say most of the feedback has been encouraging and supportive. We appreciate our parents giving us that feedback, both constructive as well as the supportive comments that they've shared with their teachers, principals, social media, et cetera. We've had a lot of people that worked really hard this summer to start off in this sort of abnormal situation. We certainly appreciate all those positive messages. And if I could share anything else with the families out there, I would say, please let your teachers know that they're doing a good job. They've been real rock stars through all of this. I also want to shout out to a number of our staff members. Board members, we've talked about how we've repurposed staff members. And so just one example would be, we had bus drivers and school staff that are taking on different roles while buildings are closed. So the bus drivers have helped us with technology, giving devices out to the multiple distribution sites throughout the county, as well as meal distribution really since March. So they've done a wonderful job with that. Also, our help desk, as you can imagine, they fielded several calls last week and today. They've done a really good job of just being patient and working through situations with families. We had a number of other operations staff and instructional people manning the phones and just sitting with them to 10 or 15 minutes and hearing the conversations that they've had with parents. I know that our parents have appreciated a calm voice on the other end of the phone, so we certainly appreciate that. We also have a number of other folks, our paraeducators, special ed paras, resource teachers, librarians, our athletic directors, who are not only doing their current duties, but really taking on some extra things within the school, given our situation. We certainly appreciate all of the work that they're doing. I do want to remind everyone that as I said last week or so, that the focus of the first week was going to be relationship building and really tech support, getting our kids into routines. I will say, I feel like our drive-through events at our schools, the virtual open houses, I know our teachers made individual calls to families. Those all were great proactive strategies to get us off to a relatively successful start. Additionally, I traditionally spend the first week of school visiting classrooms. And while that didn't look the same as it typically does, it was a different experience this year. Mr. Richardson went with me the first day, and I know that Ms. Geraltz and Mr. Schaefer, you've also joined me on a few tours in the schools. And it's just a different feeling without having students in there. But you got a really good opportunity to watch our teachers working extremely hard with our kids in this remote situation that we're in. So I saw a lot of good things. I mean, I saw the same excitement that the teachers have for students, especially in those first exchanges on that first day. I saw several wonderful examples of our teachers supporting students and families as they learn our new tools. We all know this is a challenge. Everyone's on varying degrees of their expertise with technology. I know I am as well. So I certainly appreciated all of our teachers helping my children, but also all of our students in York County. And quite frankly, the most important thing that I saw patience from families, parents, kids, and teachers. I saw grace, and I saw understanding, which is always fantastic as you roll out a new school year, especially given the situation we're in. But I also saw the challenges that we knew we would experience. I saw little ones on iPads at a couple different locations. And it's been a struggle. I saw teachers who are just outstanding teachers. I saw them struggling. So we're going to keep working extremely hard. Quite honestly, this is why it's important that we continue prepping to bring our students back to our buildings. We know that this is what's best for our kids, but we need to get them back safely back into schools and classes with teachers and other kids for academic support, social interactions, clubs, athletics, band, all of those things that just help maintain and get them to maintain those connections at school. So with that, I'll conclude my opening school report, and I'll turn it back over to Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor, and thank you for that report. So our next agenda item this evening is our operations report. Dr. Shandor.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Dr. Carroll is going to provide, he has a number of items he's going to cover during this session. And as all of our chief officers will be sharing this. And I failed to mention this, Mr. Richardson. They're going to give you an update from each of their areas, and then we'll wrap up the meeting, and I'm going to provide an update on our draft timeline for bringing students back to school in our buildings. So Dr. Carroll, I'll turn that over to you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Shandor, Chairman Richardson, members of the board. So as you may know, we started distributing devices to our elementary families on August 27th. We held 6 distributions over 9 days, and in that time, we provided over 2,500 laptops, Chromebooks, and iPads to our students. As you'll recall, our secondary units arrived late, and preventing us from perfecting our secondary computer image, before reprogramming for our use, but the timing ended up working out as we had just reached a level to satisfy the elementary demand before switching processing to our secondary units. Now, according to our family commitment form, there were about 4,500 secondary students that were not supplying their own device. And we prioritized our secondary students using multiple data points, including the last parent survey, indicating their level of need. On Labor Day Monday, we were able to make available about a third of those devices, and we continue to take delivery and have invited over 2,100 students to date to pick up their devices. Now, we continue to identify need using lists such as the absence list from the first day of school, the spring device list from last spring, input from schools, and help desk appeals. We continue distribution this week, and we expect to be able to pass out about another 1,300 this week. So we're now on pace to hit that 4,500 student threshold around September 23rd. And at that time, we will disperse once we reach that threshold, then we'll disperse any additional stock to schools for loaners for repairs and for new enrollees. Now, as far as those devices, given the conditions of our one-to-one launch here, I think as Dr. Shandor shared, the opening went fairly well. The first day had its predictable extra tech support needs. Our usual help desk has 3 persons manning it, and we added 5 of our field techs to that. We also had members of our school administration department and our instruction departments helping to reset passwords and answer questions about the Canvas learning platform. And in the first 2 days, we answered hundreds of inquiries, and we did have some programming conflicts with the Chromebooks on the second day, which we were able to remedy quickly. We also had a power outage in the Seaford area that day. Not that we didn't have enough challenges to overcome. On the third day, we did have some more programming issues with just a fraction of our iPads. And then we also had a power outage in the Waller Mill area that also included the school, and meant that we had to dispatch our teachers out to other schools or to their homes so that they could resume instruction as soon as they could. And so we had our challenges, and but we got through them, and Friday went much smoother. So all in all, I think given the size of the task, the late delivery of our units, and the inevitability that we would have some technical hiccups and the added fun of those outages, I believe we fared well, and we continue to work with families on any individual struggles. Now, the next item I'd like to talk to you about is food service. In the 11th hour, USDA was telling us that we were going to have to go back to a normal free and reduced lunch. People were going to have to produce identification, and it was going to be a much more difficult task, except for the size of the distribution. But in the 11th hour, USDA changed their mind and said that we could continue with what we were doing for the summer. And therefore, we are now still supplying food for 7 days a week for our families. Last week, we provided over 19,000 meals. And we're glad that they did that. I think the community needs it. It's shown through the numbers, and our team has rallied to be able to do that. The next item I'd like to talk about is the health metrics, and we've got a slide here to help illustrate everything for you. When we made our initial recommendation for remote learning, York County and the peninsula, and when I say peninsula, the larger peninsula, we're talking about the 6 divisions that include us, that surround us, and take part in New Horizons because we have that shared regional program. We were in substantial transmission when we made our recommendation in late July. And when you're in substantial transmission, the recommendation from VDH is that the primary route for learning is remote, but you may consider phase 1 and phase 2 guidance. And in phase 1, you should be looking at only certain special education programs. Now, we've seen a reduction just in the last few weeks, and we now have all 3 areas, the eastern region, the larger peninsula, and York County, are now all in the moderate transmission zone. And all of those, the eastern region and the larger peninsula have been decreasing for 2 weeks, and York is defined as fluctuating. Now, we've been posting a graphic, and you see an example of the graphic here on this slide to assist the public, those that are interested in understanding our health metrics or where we stand. And this continues to evolve, both in how we receive the information and also how we communicate it. We also have weekly regional calls with all the superintendents of the larger peninsula and the health department. And as of this week, we are going to change some of the verbiage that we had original report to you in late July. We had used the term steady, and we had planned to use a yellow circle to designate that. The verbiage we're now getting from the Peninsula Health Department is fluctuating. And for instance, last week, we posted that cases in York County were increasing, and we used a red arrow that pointed to the right. And that's because the case rate had risen for 9 days and the positivity rate had risen for 12. However, the way the Peninsula Health Department is now defining things is that you are termed fluctuating if you haven't reached one direction for 14 straight days. So we're now going to use this yellow double-sided arrow to indicate that we are in a fluctuating state. And we're going to change the data from last week to make sure it reflects this. So the last 2 weeks, there should have been a yellow double pointed arrow in the moderate zone. So we now start to talk about returning to class, or let me talk about the guidance there. So in moderate, we should be looking at phase 2 guidance. So that includes special education, English learners, and pre-K through 3. So we've now had, so we're now in the moderate level of transmission, and we can consider this phase 2 guidance, and which includes those additional groups on top of special education. Our plan was to observe what we called steady, and now we're labeling as fluctuating, looking for 2 weeks or better to begin consideration of increase in students in the building. Therefore, since we've had 2 reports in the moderate transmission zone, we have started assessing the viability of operational integrity for some of the lower grades. And in the meantime, we are finalizing the planning work for certain special education students, and we're working with staff and parents to make those arrangements. And Dr. Shandor will provide some target dates later in the meeting. And that concludes my report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions from any board members?
Yeah, I have some questions just for clarification on the metrics,
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Carroll, if you don't mind. So the division, we're not putting data up there. Where can families go if they want to look at actual numbers to correlate with those arrows?
Okay, so that's where it's a difficult thing. We don't even get that. So the Virginia Department of Health does have a data dashboard, and it can give you some indications on individual metrics. But you'll remember that we talked about the fact that the department came out with interim guidance right before our meeting of July 23rd and said they were going to base a determination of where the region was based on 8 different metrics and their direction, whether it was increasing or decreasing. So we have a weekly meeting with the department. They tell us where our region and the peninsula and York County, where we sit, and they give us a direction of increasing or decreasing or fluctuating. And they pull apart that report that they have completely on their side, and they give us an interpretation for our area. And so we are working completely on their data and how they characterize it. Now, in our last meeting, they did share that they are working towards a public-facing metric dashboard that they're going to publish, but there was no direction or a target date where they would be putting that out. But as of right now, we don't have that. So we're working completely based on the information that we're supplied from VDH and through the Peninsula Health Department.
Yeah, so I did push them last Thursday for a contact at the, what is it, Jim, PhD?
Yes.
And they did share an email with me. I've had a couple parents who have requested the data from those 8 metrics, and I've responded to both of them and basically said, here's the contact email with them, that if they have further questions, that they'll be able to get that information.
All right, so if folks are looking for specific data and they email, they're going to get a contact at Peninsula Department of Health, because we can't post what we don't have, right?
Exactly.
Correct. And once that information, once they do develop a public facing mechanism, so to speak, as Dr. Carroll mentioned, we'll certainly provide that information to our public.
Yeah, what we're providing now is the best way for us to just graphically represent, so people can kind of track and see where we're at. And so if they keep track of how we post it weekly, they get a sense of the direction and of what we have.
Right, and I think there's some confusion too, because if you're meeting with them, I think, what'd you just say, on Thursdays?
Mm-hmm.
And then you post that graphic on Monday and someone checks it on Friday, they're really getting data from the previous week. And so if they're looking at current information on Department of Health website or whatever, it might not necessarily match what we're showing because we're posting once a week.
Yes, and it can get confusing because some of the graphs that they have will give a 7-day trend, a trend line. But when they give us an interpretation, they're using a 14-day look back.
Okay, so that's why things sometimes aren't jiving.
Right, and I think the most important thing to remember is you're looking at the trend. You're not diving into the specifics of the statistics. As I said, I knew that last week we worked off of the fact that we had increasing days of more than 9 in 2 of the categories, and it was characterized to us as increasing. But then when you looked at a 2-week look back, now that we understand this fluctuating status, that's why we're revising last week's interpretation, because now we understand it a little better also.
So if we continue to decrease for 14 days straight, we would no longer be a yellow. We would go at that point into a green.
Correct.
Is that okay? All right, I understand better. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. If there's no additional questions, and thank you, Dr. Carroll, for that presentation. I appreciate that update. I think it was definitely needed. There was a lot of confusion in the community, so that certainly, it helps me as well.
That's understandable.
So thank you for that. So now we're going to have our instruction update, and Dr. Shandor.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Next, we have Ms. Skinner, our Chief Academic Officer, who is going to share with you several bullets related to some of the work that we're doing in instruction. Ms. Skinner.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm excited tonight to give you some of these updates on instruction. The first one I'm going to talk about is our Canvas learning management system. I'm pleased to share that we have received positive feedback about the implementation of Canvas from our parents, our students, our teachers, and our administrators. And I want to personally recognize and thank some of our school board office staff, as well as our instruction innovative coaches, we call them our IICs, who've worked countless hours training our teachers before school ended, and also offering additional training throughout the summer to our teachers. Our teachers are still refining their Canvas pages, and I assume that they'll continue to do that throughout the school year. And our administrators are currently using a walkthrough tool to review each teacher's Canvas page as well. They're using this information so that they can provide additional guidance and support to our teachers as they're learning this new management system. Parents can access Canvas by pairing to their student's account. And I know many parents have done that because I've seen that they have. But if you haven't, you can do that through Canvas. And there's also an app that parents can use to also access their student's Canvas account. And it gives parents access to things such as the calendar, grades, modules, things like that. And then also to help our students, to support our students, we've developed a Canvas module that's embedded within Canvas for our students. We've even differentiated it from elementary to secondary. And our teachers are going through that information with our students this week, so just to help our students become a little more comfortable with Canvas. They were doing it last week and they're continuing to do so. And the last thing I want to share about Canvas is just for families, if you want to learn more information about this, please visit our YCSD Return to School website. There is a Canvas page and it includes lots of videos and handouts to help parents. But if you want that personal conversation, you can also reach out to the schools. We have staff there ready and willing to help and assist our families as they begin to learn our new Canvas learning management system platform. So the next thing I'd like to talk about tonight is Virtual Academy. We had 2,648 students or families, excuse me, select Virtual Academy for their students. Out of those, 1,270 of those were elementary students, 698 were middle, and 680 were high school students, families. So that's just kind of the breakdown of where we are. I will tell you for elementary, we made every effort we could to really try to keep our elementary students tied to their home school to the greatest extent possible when we made those pairings. We are still making adjustments because we still have students enrolling. So again, we've really tried to keep those students with their schools to the extent possible. For middle and high school, we really worked with trying to allow those students to keep their selected courses. We know how important it is for those students to have access to those courses, and our teachers are working with those schedules as well. And we're also trying to reduce any conflicts with New Horizons. We took a lot of efforts to make sure that that happened for our students. And then finally, our special education students and our English learner students, we've also ensured that their home case managers and their home schools will remain their case managers to the greatest extent possible throughout the school year. I know that that person's very important to our families, and having that consistency is really important. The next thing I want to give an update on is instructional hours. On August 28th, the Virginia Department of Education released their final instructional regulations to the localities. And it's important for us to know that there are really two time requirements that we must meet this year. The first, and you've heard me talk about this back when we were in the Grafton situation, the first time requirement is that length of school term. We must meet the 990 hours or the 180 teaching days. The state has provided a waiver process for us if we're unable to do so. And then core instructional hours for each level. That's a different conversation that we've not really had before. There is no waiver for that. And so the state does require us at the elementary level to have a certain number of hours, the same for middle and the same for high school. And so we do have to meet those. We'll be working through and making sure that we're meeting those state requirements. And as part of that, the state does allow us to count both synchronous and asynchronous instruction. So that's an important thing to remember. It is also important and for families to know that we may still need to make some instructional changes with our times, like our schedules with students. Of course, if we have to do that, we don't anticipate those to be major changes, but if we do, we will make sure we give parents ample notice in regards to any of those small schedule changes we might need to make. And then finally, the Virginia Department of Education is requiring us to provide periodic updates. So we will be giving updates to the Department of Ed on topics such as how our instruction is being delivered, what formative and summative assessments we're using, and how we're monitoring student progress, the availability of professional development to our teachers, and then remediation efforts for those students who may be falling behind. And as a final note in regards to our instructional hours, I just want to remind our community that that those Wednesdays, we'll have our first Wednesday this week, and that academic flex time at the middle and high school are asynchronous instructional times. So students are expected, while they may not be meeting with a teacher necessarily, they are expected to be doing instruction during those times. All right, testing and progress monitoring. The state did share with us that state accreditation has been waived by the state superintendent, but federal accountability has not been waived. So as such, we will have SOL tests this year. They have assured us of that, and unless something changes, but that's what they've shared with us. And we will share out more information with our families in regards to the SOL testing schedule and those things as we get a little bit closer to those times. Other assessments, when the schools closed this spring, there were many students who were in the process of being evaluated for things such as special education, English language services, and gifted services, and they were not able to receive that assessment. And so we have begun those assessments. I will tell you that we have completed our gifted testing. That is finished. Our EL testing in person began on the 9th, and we will begin our special education assessments by the beginning of next week or the end of this week. In regards to the PSAT, every year, as you know, we provide our 10th graders the opportunity, the school division pays for our 10th graders to take the PSAT. And then any interested 9th and 11th graders also may take that. And so this year, the testing is typically in October. We are going to still plan to give the PSAT to our 10th graders, but we're going to more than likely move that to January timeframe for those students, with the understanding that 11th graders would still have the opportunity to test in October, because we know some of those students need that assessment for other qualifying recognition. The College Board has begun SAT and ACT testing. Our first one will be October 3rd. And if parents want to know a little bit more about that, I encourage them to reach out and look at the College Board website, as well as teachers I know are talking about it with the students as well. And then, as I shared in our previous meetings, I just want to remind everyone that our teachers are going to be using screeners and assessments that we've developed to identify our reading and math learning gaps from the FY20 school year, and we'll be using those to progress monitor student achievement this year. We're also going to make sure we're using that data to target specific instruction, to differentiate instruction and provide remediation. And then it's also going to help us with curriculum pacing, which is a really important thing to keep in mind when we're in a virtual environment. Okay, if we could skip to the next slide. The teachers and building administrators, I just want to briefly kind of give you an overview of some of the expectations we have put in place for our teachers and our building administrators. And we're doing this to make sure that there is consistency across our school division. Having a shared set of expectations helps with that process. For teachers, we are asking our teachers to offer daily office hours where they can assist parents and students. And you can see that's already built into that daily schedule. So we encourage parents, if you have questions, use that time that's provided in the schedule to reach out to those teachers, and they'll be happy to work with you about any questions or concerns that you might be having. We've also asked our teachers to make sure they set up clear expectations for online classrooms, just like they do in a traditional classroom model. It's very important to do that electronically as well. And when they've set up their Canvas courses, you'll see there's certain requirements. They're posting weekly assignments, daily lessons are posted in there, notifications for assignments or grades are also included in Canvas, and parents can see those by logging into their student's account. We've also asked our teachers, just like we would in normal instruction, to create engaging lessons that include instructional best practices. And I'm excited to see some of those things that our teachers are really starting to embark on this week already. And so more to come on that, but we should expect our teachers to be doing some of those same best practices that we've known and loved in our school division. We're also asking our teachers to continue the process of doing small group instruction. Those can be done in our Teams platform. And so you'll see those continue with our students, as well as remediation and opportunities to support students outside of that designated class time. And then last but not least, our teachers will be incorporating the social emotional learning components into their lessons. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Our administrators are reviewing each of the teachers' Canvas sites. They're also doing observations of synchronous and asynchronous instruction of lessons throughout the week. They're using that information to get feedback, and then they identify what professional development needs they need to be providing to teachers and what support they might need to give. They are monitoring curriculum pacing to ensure that we're pacing through our curriculum appropriately, and leading professional learning communities where they are monitoring student progress. And also something that I'll talk about next is they're chairing student success teams. And so this idea of a student support team really is about getting a team together in the school. So every school has a student success team. It's comprised of the school administrators, compliance coordinators, teachers, school social workers, psychologists, a variety of people. And they come together and they're monitoring things such as attendance, grades, engagement, and online learning, and their synchronous learning. And when they see a student who might be struggling or might need additional support, the team then comes together and looks to see how they can support those students who might be struggling academically, emotionally, or may just seem disconnected. They create a plan to support that student, and they'll bring the parents in also as a partner in that plan, and they'll monitor it and provide assistance to the students throughout that. And then last but not least, I want to just share with you our social emotional learning. Our school division has a social emotional learning task force that's been meeting, and it's comprised of school administrators, division administrators. We have teacher leaders on that team. We have mental health professionals, division leaders, and they were meeting throughout the summer to develop a continuum of mental health supports for our students and for our teachers. To support our students specifically, when I talked earlier about classroom instruction, in our SEL plan, we are introducing students to different competencies through classroom instruction. So if you look at the elementary schedule, you'll see the first 30 minutes of the day where they're welcoming. They're also doing an SEL lesson at that time. And our counselors are also doing monthly lessons with students in addition to what our classroom teachers are doing. And at the secondary level, our teachers are going to be integrating naturally into the curriculum at least twice a week, some of those are social emotional learning competencies. So, and there's a variety of other things that's outlined in our return to school plan that's on our division website. But tonight I just wanted to provide you with some updates on how things are going. Recognize the hard work of our teachers. They truly are just amazing to watch and the work that they're doing. And I just appreciate everything that they're doing, and our administrators who are supporting them. So at this time, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Hey, Ms. Skinner, this is Mr. Myatt, real quick. Just a couple of quick questions. Hey, when we talk about the social emotional learning component, you mentioned a continuum. So obviously you're trying to identify those students as individuals that need support. What about, for instance, in the collective? You've introduced some competencies in instruction, but could we take advantage on a Wednesday, for instance, and bring a group of kids together for listening sessions, things of that nature, where it's a little bit more collective? I think of that day on Wednesday where there might be time to do some things like that. Are you exploring some options like that?
Yes, our counselors have been working with our lead counselor, Katie Gaylord, and under the direction of the Virginia Department of Education to continue some of those types of small group instruction. And we are providing our teachers with lots of training on youth mental health, cognito training. We're doing some training with developing mindfulness coaches in our schools, as well as we're going to be offering some parent workshops on building resiliency for our students. But our school counselors are still planning to work with our students, provide that support and assistance to them as we feel those are needed. Okay,
thank you. SOL testing, any insights, the same kind of breadth and depth that you might expect in a regular school year, or is that what the signals from the state are saying? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So far, what they've shared with us is that we should anticipate SOL testing to occur. I would not imagine that they would reduce or change those assessments. Again, I can't speak for the state, but we are committed to making sure our students make progress this year. We are doing our own assessments to ensure that that progress is being made above and beyond of what an SOL test is. because those are our minimum competencies for our standards. So
Mhm.
we're working with our teachers to develop some assessments that will allow us to look at a good benchmark. Where did our students leave off when they left us? And for example, in reading, a benchmark assessment to start the school year, and then progress monitoring throughout. We don't want our students to get to the SOL test, and at that point in time, we realize that they're not prepared. We need to be looking at those things along the way.
One more quick question. From a readiness standpoint, as we begin to lean towards bringing children back into the classroom or in-person instruction, I know from a Canvas standpoint, we've got that one modality, it's virtual. When we move to a hybrid or back to a sense of normalcy, I suspect there's going to be some additional training that teachers will incur because, again, managing the Canvas system is a little bit different in a hybrid dynamic versus in a purely remote or virtual dynamic. Is that correct?
There is. When we have students, for example, at the elementary school level, when a hybrid would mean that those students are face-to-face with their teacher for 2 days a week, and they would be doing asynchronous instruction 3 days a week at home. So there is a different way to prepare for that in Canvas and we'll work with our teachers in our timeline to help prepare them for that. Right now, they are doing synchronous and asynchronous planning for their daily work, their daily schedule. I think it's just a matter of continuing to help them. I can tell you the learning curve from where we were 2 weeks ago to where we are now. Our teachers are leaders. I mean, I can just tell you, they are really amazing to watch how they've been inventive through this process and how they're using Canvas and how they're using Teams and sharing ideas with one another. I do believe that when we're ready to move to that, our teachers are going to be prepared and feel confident in doing so.
Thank you. Thanks.
Can I go with one quick one?
Sure.
This is about the SOLs. Do you think that the whole reason why the Department of Education is doing the SOLs is just to get a benchmark, maybe?
They are going to use it as a benchmark. Yes, that is one reason. But the Federal Department of Education, my understanding is the U.S. Department of Education, has shared that there is going to be no change in federal accountability. Federal accountability looks at many different things, but one of those is student achievement as measured through our standards of learning assessments. So it could be used as a benchmark, yes. And certainly to compare to where we were the last time that student had an SOL test. But again, we're doing some things at our local level to also ensure that we are progress monitoring our students.
Thank you.
I had a question about the testing you talked about earlier. I think it was one of the first things you were talking about, gifted, special ed, and English learners. Is that testing primarily happening in the school? Is it both? Doing some of it virtually, or are you really trying to do it in person to get that?
We're really trying to do that in person. All of the gifted testing was done in person. The EL testing is being done in person as well. And our special education testing, as I shared next week, will begin in person. To the extent possible, we are, of course, if a family is uncomfortable with that, we're going to work with them and try to make accommodations. But for these assessments, the teachers and the specialists felt like they really needed to be able to, and some of these you have to move things around, there's a demonstration piece to this. So we are really working hard through our partnership with operations to make sure we're bringing those students in and doing that in a safe way.
Okay. One of my other questions was about, you talked about social emotional learning and looking after our kids and their mental health and emotional well-being. And I obviously love that, but what are we doing for our staff? Because this is a new realm for them too, and very stressful, anxiety ridden. They're doing a great job. I mean, my tours on Friday were absolutely amazing. I got choked up a couple different times just thinking, oh my gosh, like look what they're doing with this crazy situation. But I just worry about that. Are we supporting them as well?
We certainly are. And Dr. Vladu can weigh in on that when
Okay.
he goes through his report as well for staffing.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Higginbotham, did you have any questions?
No, they were all answered by the previous questions already asked. I don't want to ask the same one and waste people's time.
All right, thank you.
Gotcha. And I just had one question. There's some additional testing we do with the elementary level for their reading, and I'm trying to think of the name of the
PAL testing.
Yes, we do.
PALS. That's it. I don't know why
PAL
that is.
testing. We also do VKRP testing, which is a math assessment. And there's also our reading progress monitoring assessments that we do at the elementary
So
school.
is that the plan then? Once this initial testing you've talked about is done, we're going to start the PALs and the other testing to.
Yes, the testing window that the state has provided to us has been extended. So we have the option of doing those assessments in person or online. And so we are in the process right now. It really has a lot to do with our timeline of, where our students will be. And because of course, in-person testing is always, a little bit more personal, and the teacher can really get a better understanding of what the student is capable of doing.
Absolutely.
But we're prepared to give those assessments either way.
Okay.
And I know that some teachers are already doing some small assessments with their kids. I think there was some DSA testing going on today in one of the classrooms. So some of that's already starting.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for that presentation on instruction. It was very informative.
Yeah.
And kudos to our teachers. They are doing a phenomenal job.
They are.
So now we're going to move on to our financial update. Dr. Shandor.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Thank you, Ms. Skinner. Great presentation. Great job answering those questions as well. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Bowen, our Chief Financial Officer, who is going to provide you updates in multiple areas. Mr. Bowen.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Mr. Richardson, members of the board. For my report this evening, I will update you on the end of year activity and fund balances for FY20, and then update you on a few topics for FY21 that may have some significant financial implications. So you may recall seeing a similar version of this slide at the May work session. This evening, I want to update you on these three specific funds because these were ones that we were most concerned with. You will note that the top row were projections from April, and the bottom row, these are our projections for June 30. They are unaudited, so they are subject to change. In May, I talked about some potential issues with the governor's temporary shutdown order. And we were at that time, we were cautioned by the Department of Education to review and monitor our state sales tax and lottery revenues. And as a result, and in response, we froze the majority of our discretionary spending, which resulted in savings throughout our budget. In addition, there were savings that we realized in salaries as a result of extra duties that were not performed, particularly for remediation activities and for bus drivers who typically get paid extra duty for driving to athletic events. There was realized savings in transportation because the majority of our buses were not running. And there were also realized savings in operations and utilities because most of our buildings were running at less than 10% capacity. So for the operating fund, we were projecting an end of year balance of $2.5 million. And this was adjusted downward from more than $5 million to account for declining state revenues. Also at this time, staff was working or engaged in planning for the one-to-one device program. And members, if you recall, you approved $1 million transfer from the operating fund to the new technology reserve fund. So when adjusted for that $1 million transfer, the operating fund ended the year close to our projection at $1.4 million. And I'll come back to this in just a minute. Now for the food service fund, initially we were concerned because we were going to have to dip into our reserves to cover the cost of operations. And we hadn't had to do that in a number of years. We were still required to provide meals when schools were closed. And unfortunately, as a result of the Grafton closure, we were seeing a decline in the number of meals sold. So fortunately, in March, the USDA decided to cover the cost of all meals, regardless of the family's ability to pay. But at the time I reported in May, we weren't sure how this change in federal policy would impact the food service revenue. So we were being very cautious. And so we were projecting a end of year balance of $760,000. However, in the end, our food service program, led by the efforts of Ms. Parr and our partners at Sodexo, it rebounded, and we ended up the year in typical fashion at $1.3 million. And for health insurance, this one still concerns me. And as I've shared before, the York County School Division has a self-funded health and dental plan. And what that means is we have to pay for our claims as they occur. Now, for many years, the premiums that we, the employer, and our employees have paid have surpassed the claims that we've incurred in the plan. And this has resulted in significant end of year cash balances that we've had, typically ranging from $3 million to $6 million. So when we were projecting in April a balance of $1.2 million, I will tell you, we were concerned because that was one of the lowest balances we would have ended the year. However, what's more concerning here is we ended the year with $350,000. And so as a result, we're continuing our discussions with our partners at the county, with our health insurance consultant and with Cigna. We're meeting with the county next month to discuss the timeline of going back out to bid. In the meantime, we will need to address any shortfalls from our operating budget. And this brings me back to the $1.4 million end of year balance in the operating fund. So once our audit has been completed, we will be recommending to the board that we reappropriate that $1.4 million to our health and dental fund to shore that up until time we have determined if we need to take further actions. So we'll continue to monitor the fund real closely. Again, I'm not sure if the $1.4 million transfer is going to be sufficient to cover the expenses for this year. It just depends really on the health of the employees because the claims are what they are. The more people that use the health insurance, of course, the expenses are going to be higher. So we have some work to do with our health insurance fund, and we're committed to solving that problem. So are there any questions on FY20? Okay, let me move on to FY21. As I mentioned, there's a couple of topics here that I want to talk about that again have some significant financial implications. And if we can move on to the next slide. This is total enrollment. Now this slide right here is the total enrollment of day 4 for fiscal years 2018 to the current fiscal year 2021. And what's concerning here is that big dip that we see from 2020 to 2021. Right now we're at, as of Friday, we're at 12,302 students. If you look to the top of that, you'll see that our budget was based on 13,138 students. So right now we're short 836 students. And then as of today, I didn't have an opportunity to update the total enrollment, but as of today, we were plus additional 14 for the total enrollment. Now, typically during this time of year, we're seeing those numbers grow at a much higher level than just 14. We're seeing it grow anywhere from 50 to 100. So again, some concerning trends, what we're seeing right now with our enrollment. One of the metrics we look at is of course kindergarten enrollment, because this is these are students that are new to our school division. And again, if we just look at FY20 to 2021, we see a significant decline, a loss of 231 kindergarten students. And as of today, we picked up an additional 2. So we're not making a lot of progress in the area of kindergarten enrollment. And I think part of our enrollment loss can be explained by this graph, which is our homeschool students. So again, this is the 4-year period that we're looking at. And if you see from 2020 to 2021, we've seen an increase from 407 students to 655. That's an increase of 248 homeschool students for the year. And just before the meeting, I talked to the folks over in Student Services. Applications are still coming in. And since Friday, we've had an additional 12 applications come in. So that number continues to grow. And if we go to the next slide, I'll show you some of the fiscal impacts to these slides. So for total enrollment, if we're looking just at the 836 for the year, and that is our average daily membership for the year, we would lose about $4.3 million in state funding. Now, I don't think we're going to end up at 836. Again, this number is changing, and we should see, I believe as we start to transition to face-to-face instruction, to either the hybrid model or the level models, we might see some of these homeschool students go back or come back to us. And then I'm not sure that we've seen the transition of our military students. That's been one of the more difficult things to track at this point because we haven't done the impact aid survey yet. So we haven't seen where our federal students compare to last year. But certainly $4.3 million is an alarming figure that we need to be aware of. Now, one of the things that we were real hopeful on is this legislation that was proposed in the special session. This was Senate Bill 5069, and basically this would hold schools harmless on their average daily membership. The state recognized that school divisions across the state were seeing lower enrollment than projections. So the bill would have allowed school division to claim the higher of FY21 or FY20. So in our case right now, if we were just to rely on FY21 and this bill had passed, then we would be looking at a $1 million loss instead of a $4.3 million loss. Now, what we understand, what happened here is that the General Assembly decided to take no action on this bill, but they could resurrect this legislation again in the regular session in January. The problem with that, though, and this concerns me, is the fact that 6 months of our budget will have passed by the time they take this legislation up again. So we really need to be cautious in how we approach our spending until we have further news from the General Assembly. And then I mentioned this to you at the last meeting about the revised sales tax projections. So the state did revise sales tax projections for school divisions, and when they do that, sales tax goes up, basic aid goes down. But in this case, sales tax went down and our basic aid went up, but it's not dollar for dollar. The net impact of that change on both sales tax and basic aid was a loss of $750,000. So right now, I know I'm going to have to make up that $750,000. The other thing troubling about sales tax is it is an economic indicator, and the fact that they revised it downward means that they're expecting for the economy to slow down, and that could also mean further reductions in other areas of our budget. So several steps that we're taking. Certainly, as I mentioned about the realized savings that we saw in the spring as a result that schools were shut down and we weren't running buses, we will certainly expect to see some of those savings again. It just depends on how much we save, depends on how soon we come back to school. So we do expect those to see some savings as a result of the schools being closed. We've also implemented a temporary hiring freeze. We have about 10 teaching positions and about more than 60 support positions that are currently vacant. And if those were to remain vacant throughout the year, that would save us about $2.5 to $3 million. And then we've suspended our bus purchases to the tune of $900,000. So we've already taken some actions to move in this direction to save us some money, but certainly we'll have to continue to monitor what's happening at the state level to see if further actions are needed. And that concludes the finance update this evening. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Any questions any members have?
So Bill, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brett.
No, okay. Well, my question had to do with the kindergarten numbers for this year, the reduction of like 200 in some students. And this might be a question for Dr. Shandor, or you might not even have the data. Is it like a combination of parents who are deciding to homeschool those students going into kindergarten this year, or the families having the option, depending on the birth date of the child, of just holding off on a year before enrolling them to kindergarten? Do we have any idea the play between those two?
Dr. Shandor, you're muted.
I apologize. I'm going to ask Ms. Skinner if she'll pop back on. Bill, do you know the answer to that? I would guess, but my initial answer would be that it's probably a combination of both. But if someone has that information related, Candy, do you have the answer?
I do not. That when a parent requests that, that information goes to our attendance officer. And so I would need to get that information from her. But I do think that our the homeschooling information itself is such an increase that I know that it's got to at least be a split between those.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Mr. Schaefer.
Yes, Bill. So what we're looking at right now is, for real, a little bit over $5 million deficit. What are your thoughts? Look into your crystal ball and tell me what you think about the resurrection of that Senate bill.
That's a great question, and I was very optimistic that this would gain some momentum. It did pass the first committee in the special session. However, the second committee, which was Finance and Appropriations, That's the money committee. They decided to pass on it. I think what, just again, my gut feeling on this is I think they're waiting to see how the economy is going to play out for these next few months. That would have been a very important and significant decision for them to make on such short notice. So I'm hopeful that they're going to come back and address that, and they're going to provide at least some relief, because this is a significant number for us. This would require some, I think, some significant actions just besides the buses and then holding some of those positions or all of those positions frozen, because as we start to transition back, we're going to have to fill some of these positions. Some of them are bus driver positions, paraeducator positions, and then a number of support positions, custodians and such. So we'll need to fill some of those positions as we start to transition back face to face.
And Dr. Vladu will share some of that information in the next report related to those positions.
Yes.
So if we want to advocate for them to bring this bill back, we should be advocating to our legislators at the state level, correct?
Yes,
Correct.
I've already written letters. So, and again, board members are welcome to do that as well.
Just
But
one
it's
other quick.
mainly- I'm sorry, but it's mainly just the state senators, right? Because that's where it's stuck right now.
Mhm.
Right.
But also the House members, because they're all going to have to vote on it at some point. So
Right.
all of our representatives, we should all send emails to.
Now, again, I will point out, this was a snapshot of day 4 of school. We should see those numbers improve as we continue along. And of course, how we're funded is an average daily membership, not by enrollment. So it's the average daily membership or average daily enrollment of those students over the course of the start of school through March 31st. So a lot could still change between then, and it has in the past. We've seen in previous years where in October, November, we saw a significant influx of military connected students, and we remain hopeful that that will continue.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bowman, for that
Thank you.
presentation. We appreciate that and all the work you've done on the budget. All right. Next, we're going to move into our staffing report, and Dr. Shandor, turn it back over
Thank
to
you,
you.
Mr. Richardson. Before we go to Dr. Vladu for his presentation, I did just want to thank Mr. Bowen for all the work that he's done related to our finances. As you can imagine, the last 7 months have been extremely challenging for our division, not only through the craft and fire, but also through all of the initiatives and working through the one-to-one piece. He has been instrumental in the funding aspect of working cooperatively with the county to help us, get some additional dollars over there. So really glad Mr. Bowen is a part of this team. The second thing I want to share and really just emphasize is the concern related to health insurance. It certainly has Mr. Bowen concerned, and I'm certainly concerned, and that's something that we have been watching very closely. We've had conversations with the county administrator about, but that's something that we will be doing a lot of work over the next month or so to figure out what we're going to do once we get to that point. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Bowen. We'll now transition to our final presentation, and it's a staffing report with Dr. Vladu. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor, Mr. Richardson, members of the board. So each year during the September work session, I provide a report on summer hiring. This evening, I'll begin by providing a report on licensed positions. So over the course of the summer, we filled vacancies that resulted from 89 resignations and retirements, which is down from last year. As you can see on this chart, we have a total of 9 licensed positions open. In total, we have just over 5 classroom teaching positions open, which is consistent with last year's numbers. It's important to recognize that the majority of these vacancies are related to a number of promotions and resignations, as well as retirements after July 15th. As a reminder, we may now hire a teacher under contract with another school division after this deadline. So in regard to filling these vacancies, we may hire recent college graduates, teachers that move into the area, or those that are ready to re-enter the workforce. So next, I'd like to provide an update on our non-licensed vacancies. This year, we had 36 resignations and 26 retirements, which again is down from last year. As you can see on this chart, our two largest vacancy categories are paraeducators and custodians. In this regard, we have multiple individuals at various stages of the hiring process, and we're confident that we're going to make some progress in this area. As it relates to custodial services, we traditionally contract with express professionals which can make up for some of these vacancies and provide additional assistance with custodial services. As it relates to transportation, we have 7 bus driver vacancies, 3 bus driver assistants, 2 crossing guards, and 1 dispatcher. In maintenance, we have 1 master plumber and 1 parts coordinator, while in IT, we have 1 help desk technician and another computer support technician. On average, it's important to remember that we have approximately 40 non-licensed positions open at any given time. It's also too important to remember that our principals prioritize hiring because of the deadline I just shared with you. They tend to hire for licensed positions first, and then they turn out to hire non-licensed positions. Again, that is due to the hiring dates and deadlines. So as you heard from Mr. Bowen, due to the budget outlook, we're only filling critical vacancies. So we'll continue to monitor enrollment and adjust staffing as needed. So at this time, I'll take any questions you may have about our summer hiring report as well as vacancies.
What do we define as a critical vacancy?
So for instance, if a program, let's say, we may miss a world language teacher at our high school. In fact, we do have to provide those courses at that high school so students can meet graduation requirements. So that is an example of a critical vacancies. I would also say relating to our bus drivers, once we come on under the traditional model, then we're going to need to be, in a good place with transportation. So it really depends on the need.
Can you talk a little bit about where you're sitting with substitutes right now?
So we sent out a confirmation survey to our substitutes. We have over 100 substitutes that are available to work in person. We have approximately 300, but a lot of our substitutes, or many of them, don't sub with great frequency, but our 100 go-to substitutes are available. We have several that have limitations for coming into in-person work, just as we have with the rest of our staff, but we have to confirm that our substitutes are available.
Speaking of substitutes, Dr. Vladu, there's a requirement for our substitutes to teach or substitute so many times a quarter. Is that being relaxed a little bit with the current situation?
We have communicated with all our subs that this year we're not letting anybody go simply because they haven't subbed or met the minimum requirement. We need all of our substitutes, so we encourage folks to continue to provide that valuable service, particularly as we go back to the models that we're certainly going to need these folks. And also as we're looking at accommodating our employees, our substitutes will play a critical part in that.
Great, thank you.
And because things look different right now, how do you prepare a substitute to go back and teach virtually?
That's a great question. So we have dealt with a number of long-term subs. So once we recognize that we have a long-term vacancy due to FMLA, our staff here identifies that individual, provides the Canvas training, then we put them into like a regular teacher. They have access to Aspen, they have access to Canvas, and they can deliver instruction. For the daily subs, that it is not feasible to provide that access to Canvas due to the training requirements. However, they are creating or they are conducting the substitute teaching in Microsoft Teams. A teacher, for instance, if they're absent, they'll create a Teams meeting, and therefore the substitute can go ahead and deliver instruction in that Teams meeting. Again, that is only for daily subs.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Vladu, for that presentation. I appreciate that update. So that concludes our reports, except for one last one from Dr. Shandor. You have a short presentation on a rough draft.
I believe Dr. Vladu has a little bit more information to share.
Oh, does he?
Yes, he has the operational integrity piece.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. So at this time, I would like to talk about our, or provide a report on our staffing metrics. So as you're looking at this chart, it represents the availability of staff for in-person work under the current model. So as a reminder, barring any accommodations or telework approvals, staff are required to come for in-person work 2 days per week. So let me give you an example. We have a total of 566 elementary teachers and paraeducators. 494 are available for in-person work 2 days per week with no limitations. However, we have 65 staff that are working remotely, 2 that require accommodations, and 5 that are unable to work because they're on leave. So under the current remote learning model, we have 72 elementary teaching staff that have limitations for in-person work. However, we have 60 staff that are teaching virtual academy. As such, we would be approximately 12 staff members short if we were to require elementary instructional staff to report to work 2 days per week. It is also important to recognize that many teachers are teaching remotely and caring for their own children whose schools or child care programs are closed due to COVID-19. So the reason for these numbers and why they're expected to change is because as we reopen schools and programs, students would attend school 2 days per week, while staff would be required to attend 4 to 5 days per week. Now, I'd like to give you a secondary school example. At a middle school level, we have approximately 60 classes that are being offered. At the high school level, we have approximately 200 classes that are being offered. In most cases, each of these classes requires specific teacher licensure. Additionally, many of these classes are singletons. So for example, in most cases, each school has 1 band teacher, 1 calculus teacher, 1 technology education teacher, or 1 physics teacher. As such, as you're looking at this chart, currently we have 48 high school instructional staff that are not available for in-person work. Many of these staff members, again, represent single programs. As such, we would not be able to offer many of these courses in person, given current limitations. Lastly, it is important to recognize that the numbers on this chart represent staff availability for 2 days of in-person work. As you will remember, the availability of staff for 5 days of in-person work is likely to decrease as staff may apply for ADA accommodations, as well as expanded leave under the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. However, because we have a process for accommodating staff to work remotely, the number of staff that are unavailable to work has not impacted our ability to staff our schools and programs. It is also important to recognize that the majority of YCSD staff are available for in-person work, and as such, as we incrementally bring back programs, we'll work through these staffing considerations. So at this time, I'll take any questions or comments you might have about the staffing metric.
I have one question. The previous survey that went out to the teachers and paraeducators about needing accommodations for work, that was on the fully remote setting that we're on now. Was there any way to indicate if it would change when we went back to a hybrid or leveled setting?
Yeah, so we had an initial survey before the announcement that we would be going remotely, and that survey inquired as to staff availability for 5 days of in-person work. And at that time, it looked at, again, approximately 20 to 25% of staff would have some limitations and intended on applying for accommodations. That number significantly decreased when the announcement went out that we are starting in the remote setting. So currently the chart you're looking at is for the 2 days that staff are required to report for in-person work in the remote setting.
Okay.
Then Dr. Vladu, if there's no other questions related to those metrics, I know that Ms. Geralt's had a question earlier related to what we're doing for staff members.
Absolutely, and thank you for that question. Our team has been working to address that need. Certainly, the mental well-being of staff is critical as they serve the needs of students. So we have 3 items that are available and an item that we're actually working on. So first, Cigna is offering a variety of telehealth options for mental health. Again, that list has been provided to us and to our schools, and staff can take advantage of that. Second, our EAP program, you do not have to have health insurance to take advantage of that program. It's all types of counseling that are available for staff. And lastly, our team, again, has been working hard to bring on board a staff wellness program. And this would allow staff from a preventative perspective, depending on what their interests are, to participate in challenges and earn rewards. It's really a fun way to do what you love doing, which should prevent, or at least as a preventative measure for the mental health of staff. And as Ms. Skinner has stated, this year, the state requires all of our staff to be aware of mental health needs, not just of their students, but their own mental health needs. And all of our staff are going to be required to complete that training by the end of September.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vladu.
Thank you, Dr. Vladu, for that presentation. It was very informative and appreciate all the work you've put into that. So Dr. Shandor, one last thing before we conclude the meeting.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Richardson. So this is just as a reminder, the board directed me to develop plans to bring back identified student groups back to the building prior to the end of the first 9 weeks, essentially the first week of November. So staff have been working extremely hard on developing plans to accomplish this. Next, I'll share a few dates, and these are target dates. So I want to make sure that I emphasize a few words as I'm talking through this. One, I'll keep saying the word target dates because that's something that we're wanting to get to. But I also want to bring to the board's attention that it says draft going across the screen. And then in red below it, it says target dates are dependent on health and operational metrics, which we had some discussion about this evening. So that's extremely important as I dive into these dates. So as you heard Ms. Skinner talk about earlier this evening, since the first day of school, we were already in the process of bringing students in. As she shared earlier, we started testing for EL students on the 9th of September. We completed the gifted testing, and we have plans to bring our special ed students in at the end of this week and the beginning of next week for assessments. So next on September 29th, we are looking again as a target date to bring back identified self-contained programs, our EL level 1 students, as well as start outdoor athletic conditioning for our athletes. So again, schedules are being developed and we will communicate those once we're done. The team is currently reviewing, again, the operational metrics related to staffing to make sure we have available staff so that we can bring those 3 groups in. But all indications right now are looking pretty positive on September 29th. Next, we have October 5th, which again, the operational metrics are being reviewed right now for pre-K through 1. I'm pushing our team to work through this to get our students back in school in person. So then the next slide, we'll have October 19th. So again, after we hopefully bring in our pre-K through 1 students, we can work through some of the major logistics of that for a week or 2, and then move on to 2nd and 3rd graders. Again, we're reviewing operational metric for these groups as well. And again, pushing our team to get our students back to school in person. However, we have to have the staff to be able to do that. Obviously, the health metrics have to be as such that we can bring our students in, but we obviously certainly have to have the staffing to go with that. So again, the health metrics and operational metrics will drive our decision. And I want to be really clear, when elementary students first return to school, this will likely occur in a hybrid model. But as I've shared, it is important that we use our plans as a living document. So meaning we need to adapt and revise to existing conditions. So in other words, if you recall, we presented our schedules for our students a while back and we tweaked those daily schedules from our original presentation. We should be prepared for more tweaks as we move forward with the schedule. So Then November 5th is on there. And again, you can see it says additional grade levels. That is just a placeholder. That's a placeholder from what was our original goal. If you remember back in July, when I made the recommendation that we go remote for 9 weeks, that date is essentially a placeholder. However, the health metrics and operational integrity, of course, will drive these decisions moving forward. So with that, I will take any questions at this time. Thank you.
I just have one brief comment. Yeah, we obviously, as we move down this path, Dr. Shandor, data management, because we have some financial dependencies, and then as you mentioned, the operational integrity and staffing dependencies, is that data management plan is going to be critical to make sure that we have that at our fingertips, particularly the operational integrity, because we may not be able to move forward at the pace we'd like. So I would just, again, encourage the division to continue to, with the health metrics, refine that and have that at our fingertips as we begin to move down the decision-making process.
Thank you.
And I have a comment as well. I'm hopeful as well. I think we all want the same thing. We want our students back in school, but we want it safe as well. And again, we have to make sure we have the staffing to get them back in. So I appreciate your guidance on that, on a draft to at least show us that. And I know you'll keep us informed as it goes along. But any additional comments or questions before we adjourn?
Just for me, I think there could be some families that are watching this and be either worried because it's not going fast enough for them, or they might be worried that it's going too fast. And so I guess when you and your team are looking into this and looking at the operational integrity and the health metrics, those things will be the ones that drive this, correct?
Yes. Yeah, obviously there's many data points, as Sean indicated earlier. And we also know that some of those data points move from time to time, as we've experienced through this whole thing. So we will look at those data points. We will work with staff to try to make sure that obviously we have staff available. And we're going to have to continue to communicate and work closely with our families as well. Because as you just said, some folks want, I've got some emails from some folks who are, really want to get their children back in. And trust me, I understand. I have 3 kids. I want them back in too. However, we have some other families that may want to go at a slower pace. So it's something that we're going to have to continue to work through and navigate together.
Now, if you guys are going through and the operational integrity is there and the health metrics are correct, would the October 5th with pre-K through 1 coming back, could that be moved sooner if your team finds that it's a possibility?
Yeah, certainly. If it's a possibility, we'll review that and make sure. Again, you saw the staffing numbers this evening on a number of different fronts. You also noticed that we're down 13 staff members in transportation as well. So we will continue to work through all of those data points, because I gave the example the other day in one of our meetings that when you make the decision to bring back the self-contained classrooms, for example, it's more than just the teacher and the paraeducator. You've got a number of related service providers that are needed for those programs. You have special transportation that's needed for those programs, paraeducators who ride that bus assistants. There's a number of resources that we have to make sure that we have in place to bring those students back. So again, we're going to do the best that we can. And my commitment is we'll get them back as soon as we can. I know the challenges out there for our families. But again, we've got to do it in a safe manner and make sure we have the staffing to do it.
Just one other quick comment. Oh, forgive me, Laurel.
No, go ahead.
One other quick one. We talked about financial dependencies, operational integrity, but you just touched on it too. And it may have equal significance as this whole regional piece. Regional services, there is a regional piece, and the county's not in a vacuum, and I don't know that we can move forward in a vacuum either. Beyond the self-contained, perhaps, and some of the other more vulnerable parts of the student population that obviously we want to get to services to as quickly, or in person as quickly as possible.
And I'm glad you brought that up. So it would be important for board members, but it would also be important for the community to know that, we don't work over here just on our own. Mr. Bowen has a group of financial directors and chief officers around the region, the peninsula and the region across the state that he works with. Ms. Skinner she has an ASI meeting with all of the, the academic folks. Dr. Carroll, the same way with operations, and Dr. Vladu. So we are communicating with the other counties. However, some of our circumstances may be a little different depending on what either your health metrics are, or more importantly, your operation things. So there's a lot of communication that goes on between the divisions, I should say.
And my last question was about the calendar, so it kind of touches on this a little bit, and I think I probably should have asked it when Dr. Carroll was on. There was a change made to the calendar for Election Day, and I wonder if you can kind of explain why that happened, and if we can get kids back in school, are we able to change it back so that Election Day is off?
So I'll bring Dr. Carroll back on. Dr. Carroll?
Yes, when we made that decision to revise the calendar, we knew, Election Day is on November 3rd. We knew that most of our students would probably still be out at that point in the calendar. So we wanted to make sure we protected as much instructional time as possible. So we went ahead and flipped those 2 days. While we don't usually have students in school on an election day, it does happen. In fact, we had it last spring. So I think we're still in probably a pretty good place there. And if we go to the targets that Dr. Shandor just shared, we'll have less students in a school than normal. And but we wanted to make sure that we protected that Tuesday instructional day.
Thank you for that explanation.
I understand what you're saying, but I used to be an election official, and the presidentials are the heaviest voting of any time. So there would be no comparison with last year to this year.
Yes, to the spring, but we will still feel that we can handle it with no problem.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
And Mr. Higginbotham, did you have something?
Just one question with the operational capacity. How are we going to deal with certain schools that are going to be on a different capacity than other ones when it comes to staffing? Like if we're able to staff, pre-K through first at most of the elementary schools, but then there might be one elementary school that doesn't have that staff. How would we deal with that disparity?
Certainly, what you just shared is the crux of the issue. So Dr. Vladu, if you want to come back onto the meeting as well, essentially what that's going to take is a lot of planning between our schools. So I'll let Dr. Vladu answer that question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Higginbotham, Dr. Shandor. You are absolutely correct. We have that data by school, and there is a wide variation where some schools may have a handful of accommodation and leave requests. Other schools have a great proportion. So to be quite, direct about this, we have to look at individual cases. Each staff member represents a specific case. And then when and if they're not available, how do we accommodate them? Well, how do we backfill those positions? So everything, it's a case on its own, and trying to work to those intricacies to ensure that our schools are staffed. So that really is the crux of the challenge.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that update, Dr. Shandor, and all of your team for their updates this evening. We really do appreciate that, and I know the public appreciates it as well. So if there's nothing else, we're in need of a closed session.
Yes, I move that the York County School Board convene in closed session pursuant to Virginia Code of Section 2.2-3711A1 of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act to discuss personnel matters relating to 1, consideration of prospective candidates for employment, and 2, performance and/or discipline of specific employees.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. Is there a second?
I second.
All right, Ms. Ford.
Yes, the motion was made by Mr. Higginbotham and seconded by Mrs. Garrels for the school board to convene in closed session to discuss personnel matters. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mr. Myatt?
Yes.
Mr. Higginbotham?
Yes.
Ms. Garrels?
Yes.
Mr. Richardson?
Yes.
The motion passed 5-0. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Our next board meeting, school board meeting will be held virtually, and it's at 5 p.m. on Monday, September the 28th. I hope everyone has a great week, and this meeting is adjourned. I just want to remind board members to log off of this to log on to the new meeting for the closed session we'll be going on to. Thank you. All right, we have 2 board members, just waiting on the rest to join.
You've got them all.
We're all on?
Yep.
Oh, there they are. Perfect. All right, we're out of closed session. So at this point, I'll need a motion to certify our closed session. Is there a motion?
Yes, I move to approve resolution number 20-39, a certification of closed session that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under Virginia law were discussed in the closed session to which this certification applies, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the meeting by the school board.
Thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. Is there a second to certify the closed session? I think you seconded it, Ms. Geralt. You're muted, though.
Sorry, yes, second.
Thank you. Dr. Shandor.
Yes, a motion was made by Mr. Higginbotham and seconded by Ms. Geralds. We'll go Mr. Myatt. He was just there. I'll come back. Mr. Richardson,
Yes.
Mr. Schaefer,
Yes.
Mr. Higginbotham,
Yes.
Ms. Geralds.
Yes.
I know Mr. Myatt was having some technical difficulties. Would
Yeah.
you like me to pass the motion? Would the
Yeah,
board like to? pass
Yeah,
the
we
motion?
have a quorum, so we can go ahead and pass the motion. I think he did have some difficulties, and he logged on just a few seconds ago.
Okay, we'll say, then Ms. Berry, the motion passes 4-0.
We can count him as abstaining,
Okay,
but he didn't, so we can do 4-0 and then just leave him blank.
okay. I will make that notation. Thank you.
All right, well, this meeting's adjourned then. We finished our business for the evening. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Oh, wait a minute, there's Mr. Myatt. Are you there? He's connecting. If he can unmute, we'll get his vote real quick. Mr. Myatt, can you hear us?
Ah,
There
there he is.
Mr. Myatt, can you hear us?
Mr. Myatt? Okay, he can hear us, or he can see us. We don't know that he can hear us. So we've already taken a motion to certify the closed session. Are you a yes in favor of certifying the closed session?
He can't hear you.
Do it in chat.
Yeah, your mic is not connected, so we cannot hear you.
Ms. Berry, are you notating in the chat?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
Brett was too fast.
Gotcha.
All right.
Hey.
All right, we're good. So did you get that vote, Dr. Shandor?
I did. The motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Everyone have a great evening. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
You know,
Bye-bye.